Seminary. This week we'll be talking about Elijah and the prophets of Baal. Last week we talked a little bit about 1 Kings 17, verses 24 and following. So the story of the raising of the son of the widow in Zarephath that Elijah met earlier in chapter 17. So if you look at chapter 17 as a whole, you can see there's this concern about water and rain, right? That Elijah approaches the King Ahab, and tells him that Yahweh controls the rain, not Baal, and that Yahweh is going to hold back the rain to prove to Ahab and to the Israelites that Yahweh is the one who's actually in charge of the rains. And there's an oath that Elijah swears, right? But then Elijah goes into the wilderness, is cared for by animals that one wouldn't expect to be able to, or birds that one wouldn't expect to be able to care for Elijah, and at a kind of creek bed that one wouldn't expect to sustain life either. But he manages to survive, and then he moves into enemy territory, foreign territory, the territory of Baal, but brings blessing and life and provision there, not to just anyone, but to a dying widow and an orphan. So, and then brings life to the orphan when the young boy dies, who has no father to kind of take care of the family and be the family protector, avenger, but also the one who has right to land to be able to farm. So all to say this, chapter 17 kind of fits together with all these different themes of what kind of God Yahweh is. Yahweh is not the national God of Israel. Yahweh is not interested in killing all the foreigners. Yahweh is instead interested in bringing life and wholeness. Chapter 18 comes on the heels of this, right? And in many ways is a story about a fight, a dispute. It has a violent end, which many people have interpreted to be positive. I think it's negative, but we'll talk about that not just ethically, but according to the text itself. But that goes a bit into chapter 19, the following story where Elijah runs away and flees, really, into the wilderness. So we'll talk about that one next week. So in chapter 18, it starts by saying, after many days. So, and that really just to say in Hebrew, after many days. So this is a long time. The word of the Lord came to Elijah. That is a phrase that's a stock phrase, and that just means that the prophet has received some kind of message from the Lord. In the third year. Now, this probably means in the third year of the drought. So this is like we fast forwarded a couple of years, and Elijah presumably has been living in Phoenicia this entire time. He's been living in Zarephath outside of Sidon, just hanging out there with the widow and the son and their overflowing oil and flour, which has transformed their life and probably the lives of people around them. So 3 years later, we don't know what Elijah's been up to, but God sends Elijah the message and says, go, show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth. So the time of the drought is done, but there's going to be this massive confrontation with Ahab, and that kind of show yourself, that's going to be an interesting issue here. Really make yourself seen by Ahab, and then God is going to bring rain on the earth. So Elijah went to show himself to Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria, 3 years of drought. Samaria, of course, being the city that was founded by Omri, the king of the dynasty of which Ahab is a part. Ahab's the son of Omri. So this is like his personal home, his seat of his power, and so on. But it's also the name of the entire northern kingdom, which was ruled from the place of Samaria. And that really starts here, Samaria being used as a name for the northern kingdom itself. So Elijah went to show himself, just like God said, made himself be seen by Ahab. And Ahab called Obadiah. So Elijah's on his way. Ahab doesn't know this yet. Meanwhile, it's like cross-cut, like in a film. Meanwhile, Ahab called Obadiah, who was over the household. And that there, remember I mentioned the household last time when talking, or actually 2 weeks ago, talking about the woman who was a widow, but also was dying in extreme poverty, but then has this overflowing, miraculously overflowing oil and meal or bread flour. And and she was over a household eventually, but now Obadiah is over the big household. As we all know, I'm sure economy means household. Now, oikonomia, the word that economy comes from, meant in the ancient world, is a Greek word that meant kind of management of one's individual household, and not just money, but everything, management of all your resources and distribution and control over your resources and planning for the future. But also it was used in a broader sense to mean the household of the empire, thinking of a kingdom or an empire as one giant household that a king was in charge of, like the father, and was supposed to kind of run, manage for at least in theory, for people's benefit. So Ahab has put Obadiah over the household. So Obadiah is kind of like the symbolic father in a way. I mean, Ahab's really the father, he's the king. But Obadiah is the one managing in the place of the king all of the resources of the kingdom. So this is going to be important in a minute. Now, Obadiah's name, Oved-Yahu, over here, I'll show you, it links up over there. There's the Hebrew, Oved-Yahu. Oved means servant or slave, and Yahu is the short form of Yahweh's name. So he's a servant of Yahweh. He serves Yahweh, but also he serves Ahab. And this is the problem. So, and then we get this little parenthetical comment from the author here. Now, Obadiah feared the Lord greatly. So Obadiah fears, and this word fear right here, yareh, really is the word for fear, like it can mean being terrified, but also it means to worship God, to be overawed by God's majesty, to kind of tremble in the presence of God. So when Isaac calls God the fear, or when Proverbs says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, that word does actually have a little bit of like kind of meaning being scared, but being scared because you understand God's immense presence. I mean, so think about, like, if you ever been thinking about how big the universe is and you get a little kind of like scared, almost like vertigo, like you're standing on the edge of a giant cliff or something, when you try to picture the immensity of the universe all at once. That's a little bit what this is like. If you really understand who God is, then you're going to be a little terrified thinking of being in God's presence. But it can also mean this kind of overawed sense of wonder and servitude, right? You're going to want to do what God wants if you understand how amazing God is. And that amazingness is actually, or like awesome, right? Awesome actually means, in a way, kind of being terrified because something is so wonderful or huge. It inspires you with awe, this feeling of like massive, overwhelming, sensation. So in any event, Obadiah feared the Lord greatly. So this word greatly here, ma'od, very much so. So he was a huge supporter of Yahweh, but at the same time, he also worked for Ahab during the day. And when Jezebel cut off the prophets of the Lord, and that word cut off there, it's really does mean in a way like killed. She killed the prophets of the Lord, of Yahweh. Obadiah took 100 prophets of Yahweh and hid them by 50s in a cave and fed them with bread and water. I don't know if that sounds familiar to you, but somebody hiding in a cave area being fed with bread and water. Obadiah is basically those ravens, right? Or the widow that we saw in Zarephath, right? This kind of miraculous provision for Elijah is echoed here. And this is going to come back in the next chapter as well, because Elijah is going to say, I'm the only one left. I'm the only one who's been serving God. And here now we know that Obadiah has been preserving 100 prophets. So Elijah is not alone. But also Obadiah is doing this in secret. What's going to happen when he has to kind of stand up and do this stuff publicly? So then Ahab said to Obadiah, his right-hand man, who is also undermining his policy in some ways, go through the land to all the springs of water and to all the valleys. So remember, it's a drought, major drought. Ahab says, go find all the water sources. And guess what he's going to say? He's the king. He wants to oversee the kingdom and help his subjects, right? He's going to say, go find the water and help the people with it, right? No. He says, perhaps we may find grass there and save the horses and mules alive and not lose some of the animals. Right. The horsepower was important in the ancient world. Think about that being like tanks today or airplanes. This was like the Air Force, the cavalry. So this was, the most important part of his war machine were horses. So he's trying to save the horses and the mules so that he can have productive economic work. But notice he's not so concerned about the people that may be dying after a 3-year drought in his kingdom. So we see a little bit about this. Then, verse 6, they divided the land between them and passed through it. So this idea of dividing is a major theme in chapter 18. The prophets of Baal do one thing and Elijah does the other. There's this fork in the road here where they have to go one way or the other, and Obadiah and Ahab take different paths. Obadiah is being forced to make choices. The people who watch are forced to make choices. We hear about Jezebel, who again we'll get to in a later lesson. We'll spend more time reflecting on her and her role. But she is making choices, right? I just want to introduce this big idea now, and that's that a lot of people look at 1 Kings 18 and think that the choice is between Baal or Yahweh. And that's sort of right, but not exactly. The choice in 1 Kings 18 is between Yahweh or making no choice at all. The system of religion that's generally followed in the ancient Near East was the acceptance that there are many gods. You didn't have to make exclusive choices, right? You might worship Baal and Ale, but you wouldn't ever tell someone not to worship another god. But also, you wouldn't shy away from worshiping another god if you go to a different city and there's a major god there. So if someone from Canaan goes to Babylon and they see a shrine to Marduk and they're part of a group that's worshiping there, they wouldn't bat an eye at worshiping Marduk because Marduk's the god of Babylon and you've just entered Babylon's territory. You walked into Marduk's territory, right? You got to show obeisance and deference to the god there. This is the basic idea of the ancient Near East. Yahweh is very different. Yahweh wants people to make choices about which God to serve, and those are exclusive choices. This is why Yahweh talks about making a covenant with Israel, and anyone else who wants to join the covenant can join. But the covenant is a marriage relationship or a business deal, right? It can mean either of those things. It means really any formal arrangement, but it's often imaged by the prophets in terms of a marriage. That's like Hosea's entire allegory, right? Is that he is acting out the marriage, the exclusive relationship between Yahweh and Israel. This was unusual in the history of the world, this idea of an exclusive relationship with one God, which is why we don't find covenants among other peoples of the ancient Near East between gods and people, especially between a group of people. That would have been seen as very strange. But that exclusive arrangement would have been very unusual. But also the idea that this meant that you couldn't have any dealings with other gods. Now, as I said before, this like the way the Bible tells it is that this covenant exclusivity exists precisely because the other gods are enmeshed in a system that is going to produce outcomes like the Hebrews being enslaved by Pharaoh. That's what happens when you serve the gods of Pharaoh, or you serve the gods of Canaan, or you serve the gods of Babylon. These systems reproduce themselves. Yahweh is wanting exclusivity because Yahweh wants a different way. And serving a god means conforming your life to that god. So in any event, this idea of making a choice, you have to make a choice. That is the major concern here. So I mean that in a way, making Yahweh one part of the pantheon of all the Canaanite gods. That was what Ahab and Jezebel were doing. They could say, we are worshiping Yahweh. We're Yahweh worshipers. It's not, I mean, we have a temple for Yahweh. We bestow it with gifts and we show up and we do our sacrifices. We say our prayers to Yahweh. But we also say our prayers to all the other Canaanite gods. And by the way, Yahweh plays a role in that system of the Canaanite gods for Ahab and Jezebel. And we assume for many people in the northern kingdom of Israel. What Yahweh doesn't want is little scraps or to be conformed to the image of the gods around them, and thus the people to be conformed to the images and the practices of the peoples that surround them. Not because other people are dirty or bad or foreign people are bad. Remember, Elijah goes and finds the widow. But he finds the widow up in Zarephath in Canaan, in Phoenicia. He finds the one that is going to respect the life of a wandering person who is not part of her tribe, and who is going to seek to fill that person with what they need, the sustenance that they need, even at her own expense, when she herself is suffering. That's who Elijah is looking for. That's the kind, like she may be praying to Baal, but she's living her life in a way that at least suggests an openness to being conformed to becoming part of the kind of true community of Yahweh worshipers. So, anyway, that kind of making a choice, the choice that you have to convince people of or at least that Elijah has to convince people of, is that you need to make a choice at all. If you think there's a choice to be made, you're on Yahweh's side. So they divided the land between them and passed through it. So it's all this choosing language. I mean, that was the thing that was hard to convince people of in the ancient world. So Ahab went in one direction by himself, the king. I love the idea, like these kings in the ancient world. I mean, we think of someone like running like Microsoft or something, a big company like a CEO, or a president today. They've got people to do things for them. They don't need to physically do anything. They just need to kind of control and guide and direct, be a public spokesperson. But in the ancient world, in 1 Samuel 15, King Saul has to go and plow a field. He's king. He still has to plow a field. I mean, the people actually do their own work in the ancient world, even kings. So Ahab's going in one direction by himself. The king is going to look for grass to feed his. This is how few people there are working on the staff of King Ahab. And Obadiah went in another direction by himself. Or maybe Ahab doesn't trust other people, or maybe it's just a way for the narrator to kind of get Ahab by himself. But in any event, Obadiah was on the way. Behold, Elijah met him. This word behold, this is the Hebrew word hine, which means something comes into like your point of view. When you see that word in the Bible, it's the narrator trying to like make you imagine that something pops into your vision, right? If you're looking from the perspective of Obadiah, whoa! So whenever you see behold, you might think, whoa, or check it out, something like that. So Obadiah was on the way. Remember, and the way can be used, as this metaphor for Yahweh's way, right? The way of Yahweh, the path of the Lord, and so on. So Obadiah's on his way, and behold, Elijah met him. And Obadiah recognized him and fell on his face and said, "Is it you, my lord Elijah?" This is kind of complicated here, but my lord, right, this is Adonai. This is a word that can be used of Yahweh. It can also be used of people who are in some position of authority over you. So is it you? Is that you, my lord? And then Elijah. Elijah's name is my God is Yahweh. That's his name. So is it you, my Lord, my God is Yahweh? So even saying Elijah's name is like a confession of faith in Yahweh and exclusivity, really. So Elijah answers him, "It is I. Go tell your Lord, behold," check it out, "Elijah is here." Now this is a bold thing to say in verse 18 right here. And he answered him, "It is I." So I'm here. Yeah, it's me. Remember, he's been missing for 3 years. But then go tell your Lord. And this word right here in Hebrew, go tell the Lord of the Adonai of you. Go tell your Lord. And he means Ahab. So this is like a subtle dig, right? Where he's saying, actually, you are serving Ahab. And say, Elijah is here. Hine, that behold. Check it out. And then it doesn't say is here. It just says Elijah. What that means is, my God is Yahweh. So what Elijah is really saying to Obadiah is, it's got two levels. The first level is, go say, hey, it's Elijah. I found Elijah. But he's also saying, go to him and say, Eli Yahu, my God is Yahweh. He's saying, take a stand. And that stand is going to involve some danger to you probably. And Obadiah gets that right away. His response is, how have I sinned that you would give your servant into the hand of Ahab to kill me? Now, Ahab wants Elijah to come to him. So Obadiah finding Elijah would be a good thing for him, you'd imagine. But actually it's a bad thing because as he continues, and by the way, the idea, how have I sinned, right? The woman said this too, the woman of Zarephath when her son died. This idea that Elijah is coming here to kind of convince people of all of their sins. That might actually be true for Obadiah. He's done some good things, but also he needs to make a stand here. As the Lord your God lives, here's his oath. Remember, 1 Kings 17 starts with that oath. There is no nation or kingdom where my Lord has not sent to seek you. So he's swearing, I swear, Ahab has gone everywhere to find you. And when you would say, when they say he's not here, he would take the oath of the kingdom or nation that they had not found you. So this is like Ahab's policy, is to go to each little kingdom and try to make them swear oaths that they haven't seen Elijah. And now you say, go tell your Lord, behold, Elijah is here. So Obadiah's going to go say, hey, I found him. But then as soon as I've gone from you, the Spirit of the Lord will carry you, I know not where. So God's going to take you away somewhere else. And this is like the fiery chariot at the end of Elijah's story, which we already know is the end, right? But God pulls this guy out and sends him different places and so on. So Obadiah says, this is a trap. You're trapping me. You're going to make me die because I'm going to go tell the king you're here, and then you're going to leave, and then I'm going to have made my declaration of faith, really, by even saying your name the way that you want me to say it, and then you're going to be gone, and you're going to leave me hanging the bag, and I'm going to get executed. And so when I come and tell Ahab that he cannot find you, he will kill me, although I, your servant, have feared the Lord from my youth. So he's saying, I really am on your side. You need me, right? I can help you. I'm a good guy. Don't put me in this situation. Has it not been told, my Lord, what I did when Jezebel killed the prophets of the Lord? So here he's spilling the beans on that little parenthetical thing before, right? I hit all these guys, and I'm a good guy. I've done the right thing in secret, but I've done it. And now you say, go tell your Lord, right? Go tell your Lord Ahab, right? Behold, Elijah is here, and he'll kill me. So Obadiah is freaking out. He repeats the same thing a couple times in two different ways. This is to try to get across the idea that he's full of emotion right now. And Elijah said, this is Elijah's response, as the Lord of hosts lives. This is an oath, by the way, right? So another oath. There have been a lot about oaths right here, right? Oaths are about loyalty, about making a declaration, a public declaration of loyalty to something. I swear I'll do this. I'll swear I'll do that. I swear I'll be loyal to you. What Elijah really wants is oaths, right? He wants a declaration, a declaration of allegiance to a god. In a form kind of like an alliance, right? You can't like have alliances with everybody. A lot of alliances are kind of exclusive relationships, right? So that's kind of what Elijah is trying to get people to think about. Their relationship to God is really kind of something like an allegiance, an oath of allegiance, which wasn't the way people understood the relationship to the gods. So as Yahweh of hosts lives, and by the way, there's two things important about this. Yahweh of hosts, right? That doesn't mean that Yahweh likes to set the table for nice meals. Hosts here means armies. Sabaoth, this right here, this Hebrew word Sabaoth, Lord Sabaoth is in some hymns that people know in the Christian tradition. Lord Sabaoth or hosts. This means the armies. Yahweh's in charge of the armies. So he's reminding Obadiah where the real power is. You're worried about like dying from violence from King Ahab. Yahweh is the one who's really in control of the authority and the powers and principalities, but also actual physical power on earth, right? So as Yahweh, the Lord of hosts, lives, and Yahweh being the living God, Chai in Hebrew. If you've ever heard Jewish people or people speaking Hebrew in some way clink glasses and offer health, it's l'chaim, right? Like cheers, l'chaim. The la means two or four, and chai means life, and chayim means like lives, like to life. That's the blessing. So Yahweh is the Lord of life. Yahweh is alive and is living. The idea here is that Yahweh is the God in charge of life, who gives life, who creates life and sustains life. That's been important throughout the Elijah stories. But also the idea is that the other gods somehow are not alive. That's going to come into being in this story. That kind of way of thinking. So as Elijah said, as the Lord of hosts lives, before whom I stand. So like stand in like the idea is like in a court, people servants would stand before the king or something and like wait to be addressed. Think of like a movie where there's a court and a king or a queen. So I stand before it, like I'm waiting, to serve my king, who is Yahweh is my king, right? Not Ahab. But so it's the idea is, but who do you stand before is the kind of implicit question here. I will surely show myself to him today. So Elijah swears, he says, I'm not going to run away. I'm not going to get taken away. I'm going to show up there. So you go and tell the king and I will actually show up. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him. So Obadiah actually lives up to this call, this dangerous call that Elijah is asking him to do, standing up for what he believes, what he truly believes. And, maybe it's one of those things where he didn't even know what he truly believed until he had to actually stand up and do it. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. So Ahab saw Elijah, and he said, is it you, O troubler of Israel? I love that, the one who makes trouble. In his mind, Elijah is the troubler. Elijah's brought the drought. Elijah is like messing with him. Elijah is messing with the people on his staff, like Obadiah. He's tempting the people of Israel to be insurgents or, to not have loyalty to the king and so on. Oh, if Israel would be great if just this guy would leave us alone, right? I don't know if you've ever felt like that when someone's like kind of raising a ruckus about something or pointing out something. Like, it would be so easy if this person would just shut up. But then maybe also you've reflected after that moment and thought, that person actually might have a point, right? Like the gadflies get attention sometimes because they're just being gadflies. Sometimes it's because they actually have something to say. So who was the one who's troubling? Well, and Elijah says, I have not troubled Israel, but you have, and your father's house, that's Omri, because you have abandoned the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals. The Baals here, meaning all of the lords, the high gods of the Canaanites, including Baal, the particular storm god of ancient Canaan. So you've taken, it looks like I'm troubling, but I'm the one who's actually saying the right thing. So imagine someone who like stages some sort of protest where it looks like they're inconveniencing everybody, but really they're just trying to get attention, focused on their cause. And let's imagine their cause is just and righteous, right? They're not the ones who are actually troubling. The ones who look like they're living their lives quite normally, right? Not troubling anyone at all. They're the ones who are actually troubling the soul, conscience, constitution of a community, right? Not constitution in the technical document sense, but constitution in the sense of like how a community is preserved and created and so on and sustained. So this worship of foreign gods is actually the thing that's troubling Israel, not just because the name of a god is the most important thing, but because it's the way that this shapes our community. I mean, by the way, Yahweh goes by lots of names in the Bible, right? Yahweh's okay having other names. Yahweh's even called Baal a bunch of times. Baal means Lord. Yahweh gets called Baal a bunch by Hosea even, who hates Baal, uses the word Baal to talk about Yahweh. So all to say, the name is not the important thing here. Whether you call yourself a Lutheran or a Presbyterian, I doubt that's the important thing to God, right? What you do actually shows what you believe. So then, now therefore, send and gather all Israel to meet me. That's Elijah speaking, right, to Ahab at Mount Carmel. This place, it kind of juts out into the sea in northwest Israel. Carmel means the Garden of Ale, the Garden of God. It's a fecund place, a place that produces a lot of agricultural goods. It's pretty beautiful, like looking out onto the Mediterranean Sea and so on. So gather all Israel at this major mountain, right, and a place of great agricultural production, but it's been a drought for 3 years and so on. And the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. We'll talk a little bit more about Asherah and Jezebel later, but this is Asherah is one of the Canaanite deities that is about kind of the production of life and agricultural produce. So Baal brings the rains, Asherah helps things to grow and kind of feeds the earth, according to the Canaanite pantheon. So let's bring all the people who trust in Ahab's way, and then let's bring I'll show up just by myself and I'll represent Yahweh. So Ahab sent to get all the people of Israel. They gathered all these other prophets to Mount Carmel. By the way, there's prophets of other religions. Prophets aren't unique to Israel, right? So Elijah came near to all the people, approached all the people. So the people are there, and they're kind of like unsure what to do, right? But then there's the prophets of Baal and Asherah that are representing their way, and just Elijah by himself representing his way. So Elijah came near all the people and said, "How long will you go limping between two different opinions?" That word limping can mean kind of dancing, like jumping, hopping. So how long are you going to go kind of jumping back and forth between these two different opinions? And that is a really important statement here. Again, the issue is that the people don't know that they need to choose. Like, you need to choose is the most important thing about this meeting, right? Getting that message across would have been revolutionary and strange in the ancient world. And by the way, Yahweh is the one God that we can't find in anyone else's pantheon in the ancient world. Other gods would show up in other people's pantheons. Seth, the god of Egypt, that's Baal, the storm god from Canaan. No joke, we can see this happen, we can prove it historically and by texts and so on, that Baal ends up working his way into the Canaanite pantheon and is adopted as the chaotic storm god of the desert. Gods switch pantheons all the time and are kind of crossover, and are accepted in different pantheons, but Yahweh's not, because Yahweh demands exclusivity. This is the fight, right? Elijah wins the fight. Not everyone worships Yahweh, but the people who don't want to do things Yahweh's way, they don't worship Yahweh, right? So how long will you go dancing between these two different opinions? You can't do that anymore, right? If Yahweh is God, follow Yahweh. But if Baal, then follow Baal. So you have to choose a path. And remember Obadiah and Ahab choosing different paths and going down different paths. Like, that would have been revolutionary to people. You have to choose a path. You can't just do everything. You can't just say you like everything, So in any event, and the people didn't answer him a word. So the people are silent. They don't get it yet, but also they don't want to make a choice because, who's going to win? They don't come out against Elijah, but they're non-committal because They don't understand that you need to make a commitment yet. Then Elijah said to the people, even I am only left a prophet after the Lord, but Baal's prophets are for it. Now, he should know at this point because he's been told did he not believe Obadiah? Is he forgetting? Is this rhetorical effect? I don't know. But in the next chapter, he is going to repeat this claim to God. So he probably doesn't believe Obadiah's claim, or he thinks that they've been killed, the prophets in the meantime or something, the prophets who love and serve Yahweh that Obadiah was talking about. But anyway, Elijah says, I'm the only one that's left, but Baal's got 450, so it's hugely outsized odds, right? And then he proposes the contest, which would have been like so strange, right? Let 2 bulls be given to us, let them choose 1 bull for themselves, cut it into pieces, lay it on the wool, but don't put any fire on it. I'll prepare the other bull and put it there, but not have any fire. So the sacrifice, right? The gods need sacrifices according to the general idea of the ancient Near East. That's what the gods eat. But the people are supposed to cook it, the food. So gods don't do this. Gods don't cook the food themselves. They created people to do this kind of service work for them, according to the language and culture of the ancient Near East. This is a strange thing to ask of a god. But it's kind of a contest here to see which god is actually alive or paying attention, right? And I will, then in verse 24, and you will call upon the name of your God, and I will call upon the name of Yahweh, the God who answers by fire. That is God. So this is, his rhetorical claim here. You can call upon the name of whatever God you're calling on, but my God is really God, and my God will throw fire down, and so on. We know that in the Elijah and Elisha stories, fire is really important as an element. The chariots of fire, which show up in chapter 2 of 2 Kings, when Elijah is taken up into heaven. Also, those chariots of fire return in 2 Kings 6, one of my favorite stories of the Bible. There's other stories throughout, by the way, in the Elijah story where fire shows up. This is all linked, I think, to the theological conception of God in Deuteronomy 4. If you haven't read Deuteronomy 4, just check it out. It's a great passage, right? Deuteronomy is a book that is a book of Moses' sermons that Moses gives right before Moses dies on the Transjordan side before the people are allowed to enter into the Promised Land across the Jordan River. So it's like Moses kind of summing up. It's like Moses' last will and testament and a bunch of sermons that he gives. And chapter 4 is the end of the story of how Israel got to be where it is. He's like kind of reminding the new generation about where the people came from. And in chapter 4, he talks about Sinai, and he's talking about how God appeared as fire. And God appearing as fire is super important to Deuteronomy because Deuteronomy's conception of God is that God can't be imaged. You're not supposed to make a cult statue. You're not supposed to constrain God anywhere. God lives in the temple, sort of, but really it's God's name that dwells in the temple, according to Deuteronomy and 1 Kings 8, which is a prayer that Solomon gives that kind of draws on this theology. So not containing God's name is kind of a name that can't be contained. I will be whatever I will be. God's you can't put God in a box, and you can't label God and constrain God in that way or control God. God is sovereign and free. And so Deuteronomy 4 talks about fire like that. Like, you can think of fire, you can kind of picture it in your head, but there's no one picture of fire, right? It keeps moving and changing, and that's what it is. It's a thing that keeps moving and changing because it doesn't obey me and like what I want it to do or look like. It doesn't conform to an image that I understand already. So in any event, that God who answers by fire. So God's control over fire, but also fire being used as an image for God is really important throughout. So the people say, sure, it's well spoken. Good. Really what they say is, good word. The word is good. So Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose for yourselves 1 bull and prepare it first, for you are many, and call upon the name of your God, but put no fire to it. Okay, so here's you repeating this. And then they took the bull that was given them, they prepared it, and they called upon the name of Baal from morning until noon. So 3 hours of screaming Baal's name. Oh, Baal, answer us, answer us, answer us. But there was no voice, and no one answered. This is a great Hebrew storytelling right here. There was no voice. This word kol is the Hebrew word which means, it can mean thunder, like the sound of, that goes alongside lightning. But it can also mean a voice, and it can mean a large sound. This was exactly the word that was used to talk about kind of the voice that the people heard from Sinai in Exodus and repeated in Deuteronomy. We heard Yahweh's kol, Yahweh's booming, thunderous voice. But there was no voice. And then no one answered. That verb, ana, to answer, right? It's to kind of reply, right? There was no reply to their screaming. and they limped around the altar that they made. That's the same exact word that Elijah used to talk about how the people were kind of dancing between two different opinions. So I don't think limping is actually a good translation of this. It's probably more like dancing. And they danced around the altar that they had made. Elijah says, Yahweh wants you to come down firmly and make a choice, instead of dancing around all these different gods, really in the name of your king and keeping things, keeping the king's system the way the king wants it. So at noon, Elijah mocked them. Elijah watches for 3 hours, and then he starts to make fun of them. And I just love that, the word, mock. He's actually ridiculing them. And Elijah's like, sarcastically, hey, keep yelling, right? Cry aloud, scream, right? Because, you're talking to a God, right? Maybe your God's thinking, or he is relieving himself. This is that translation. Maybe he's on a journey, right? Maybe he's asleep and must be awakened. That really did mean, it seems, in the ancient world. Maybe your God is on the John. It's kind of, reading the paper or something, engrossed in a novel, not paying attention. But the idea that a god would need to relieve themselves is also making fun of the idea that ancient Near Easterners thought that the gods actually ate food, which Yahweh didn't, right? So this is a thing that Elijah can poke fun at. You're clearly your God is a real God, but 3 hours of screaming at your God to help you and your God hasn't paid attention yet. Gotta be something, right? Something's up. Your God's busy fishing or something like that, right? Maybe asleep. The idea that Yahweh is a living God means more than just alive, not dead. It means that Yahweh is there when you need Yahweh. So then in the next verse, they cried aloud, they cut themselves. This is something you're told not to do in Deuteronomy and so on. We don't actually think that ancient Canaanites did this while worshiping necessarily. Blood could be used in rituals sometimes in the ancient Near East, but for asking for sacrifices, I don't know. But in any event, all to say, them cutting themselves seems a bit kind of, poking fun at them a bit, and blood gushed out upon them and so on. As midday passed, they raved on until the time of the offering of the oblation. This is reminding us of the time in the temple when offerings would be given to Yahweh. So, when it gets near the time when the sacrifices are actually due in the temple, that's when Elijah's going to act, right? Yahweh, it's not that Yahweh's getting hungry, but, Yahweh's getting used to smelling this nice smell of the offering. So now, time for my turn, right? But there was no voice, that coal, right? There was no voice. There was no thunder or whatever. No one answered. No one paid attention. And this is added. Last time I said there's no voice and no one answered. This time, no one's paying attention. That's awesome, right? It's kind of extending. It's a bolder claim right there that no one is actually bowing down to, like, bending the ear to kind of hear and listen. There's no one's on the phone, right? That address doesn't even exist, right? Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come near to me." So gather round. People are probably backed up from the display that the Canaanite priests have been doing, the priests of Baal. So Elijah says, "Come near to me," and the people came near, and he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been thrown down. So the idea there is that there had been some sort of standing stones to offer gifts to Yahweh that had some of them been knocked down. Probably hadn't. It's like this part is probably dramatic, right? He's rebuilding the altar. He took 12 stones according to the number of the tribes of the son of Jacob. So this idea that the 12 stones representing the 12 tribes. You can see this in Exodus 24. You can see this in Joshua with the Ebenezer. The idea that kind of building these like stone things representing the tribes of Israel in fealty to Yahweh is kind of important. To whom the word of the Lord came, saying, "Israel shall be your name." So this is referring back to Genesis, right, when his name is changed, the wrestling by the Jabbok River. So pointing back to that moment where, Israel becomes Israel. Right? And with the stones, he built an altar in the name of Yahweh. So again, the name of Yahweh being important, the naming of Israel being important, and so on. That exclusivity, even wrestling with, kind of the close contact with being mentioned there. And he made a trench about the altar as great as would contain 2 seahs of seed, and then he put the wood in it, and he kind of puts water all around. So he's, just imagine like you're trying to light a fire and everything's wet. It's impossible, right? But Elijah wants everyone to know that he's not doing this. It's not a magic trick. This is God. God is doing something that can't be done. And then he said, do it a second time. So they throw water all over everything a second time. And they fill a trench of water all around. And they did it a third time. So there's just water everywhere. He's making it all wet. Now, by the way, they're in the middle of a drought, so this is probably very pricey, there. It's probably what everyone's hoping to drink, who's gathered there. They're thinking, gosh, this guy's wasting all this water, right? At the time of the offering of the oblation, so this is right when, like in the temple in Jerusalem, the sacrifices would have been made for Yahweh. Elijah came near and said, "O Yahweh, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel," using Israel instead of Jacob there to mean like everyone, right? All of us, Israel, the ones that God has chosen and set aside, and so on. This kind of personal connection to God, to the ancestors there. Let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done these things at your word, right? His own validation is an important part of this, and we'll see this in the next chapter as well. So then he calls out, "Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back." So here's kind of language that also comes from Deuteronomy about hearts. Your heart is super important to God, not just in terms of your emotions. Heart also meant your seat of cognition. They thought your brain was just kind of cotton stuffing. They thought you thought out of your heart in the ancient world. So turn their minds and hearts, our whole selves back. So this refers really to Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, the Shema, the famous prayer. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is your God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your hearts and soul and mind and strength, and so on. So this, this kind of turn your hearts and minds and everything back to God. And then the fire of the Lord, right then, right? So Elijah says, and Yahweh does. We're going to come back to this again and again. Elijah is kind of more of a conduit of God's presence than he is a typical prophet who bears the word of Yahweh, and that's it. So then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and the dust and licked up the water that was in the trench. The tongues of fire is a ancient Hebrew way of talking about fire. So here it's like, like these tongues kind of licking up. They think about Pentecost, right? The tongues of flame. So the licking up the water in the trench, God's kind of thirsty or something. But it's just to show the people Yahweh's power. People saw it. They fell on their faces. They said, "Yahweh, that's God. Yahweh, that's God." And that's literally what it says here. Yahweh, Hu Ha Elohim. Yahweh, that's God. So that, like, there's one God, and that's just Yahweh, right? So the people have made this kind of declaration, this oath of loyalty, public oath, but also they've made the choice. Again, if you make the choice, that choice is Yahweh. There's no choice for Baal. If you're either with Baal and everything else, and Yahweh is maybe a subsection of your local pantheon or something. In the Northern Kingdom, that seems to be the way that the kings were trying to push people. As I said, it doesn't end up working out, but that was in jeopardy here. And Elijah said to them, "Seize the prophets of Baal, let not one of them escape." And they seized them. And Elijah brought them down to this brook, Kishon, this a stream, and slaughtered them there. And that word slaughter really does mean slaughter, like an animal. This is grotesque. It's often been taken as a triumphalist thing. Yay, isn't this so great that Elijah is killing all these people? I'm going to put out there the idea that this is a problem. Because Elijah thinks he's won. Winning to Elijah right here means getting rid of all the bad people. The people with the bad ideas, the bad opinions, the bad political takes, the people who support the wrong king. Let's just cut those people out. Let's just kill them. And then everything will be great, right? This is a temptation throughout the Bible. This is a temptation throughout history. The Tower of Babel is kind of like this, right? If everyone could just say the same words and just be part of the same community and all have one goal together, and there just are no other people who are kind of the bad ones, right? If we all have perfect unity and harmony, that's good. But instead, God scatters the people and confuses their languages in order to say, no, actually, getting rid of all of the people who don't think and talk like you is not good. What's good is to live in community with people who are different from you. So this idea that we're going to eradicate the bad people, it looks here like Elijah has won. But in the next chapter, we'll see that Elijah not only hasn't won, but this kind of victory actually leads Elijah to severe depression. This leads him to a rethinking, like a crisis of conscience and faith. So I think that this comes back in the next chapter, this kind of thinking that this is going to be the end, because it's not the end. And when this is not the end, Then Elijah freaks out. So Elijah then says to the king Ahab, hey, go up and eat and drink. There's a sound of rushing rain. Rain is about to come, right? So it's been 3 years since rain. The whole point was that at the very beginning of this, in chapter 17, Elijah said, hey, it's not going to rain until my word. I'm about to give the word, so get ready. And Ahab goes up to eat and drink, and Elijah went up to the top of this mountain where the contest was, and he bowed himself in the earth and put his face between his knees. You can see over the ocean. There's tons of water right there. Of course, salty. You can't drink it, but it's kind of symbolic seeing of water, but also of where the storms would come from and so on. And so he bows down to Yahweh, and he says to his servant, and we'll talk about this servant and the servants of Elijah and Elisha more later, but he's got this guy with him. Go up now, look toward the sea. And when it looks at there's nothing there. And he goes up 7 times, keeps going to check and check and check and check. And the 7th time he says, there's a little cloud out there. And then he went to Ahab and says, hey, get ready, get your chariot ready. It's going to get muddy up here. Watch out. Remember, it's been 3 years since it's been raining, so Ahab probably doesn't believe him. But in a little while, the heavens grew black and the rain clouds come, and Ahab rides all the way to Jezreel, this really important city that we'll hear more about later. And the hand of the Lord was on Elijah, and he gathered up his garment. This is, kind of tying up his garments so he could run. Girding your loins is what this is often called. If you think about wearing a big tunic, kind of like a giant, dress that men would wear back then, if you want to run, that can be hard. So you kind of tie it up like a giant diaper, and then you can run, or you can fight and things like that. So he gathered up, he girded his loins, he gathered up his garment, he tied up his tunic, and he ran before Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel. So think of like a guy in a chariot, and this other guy is just like running past him. Elijah's filled with God's power, and he's like just burning through. It looks like a huge, important, amazing victory, but as we're going to see next week, there are some lingering problems. Israel seems to have been put on the right track here, but at the exact same time, Elijah himself seems to have taken some missteps. All right, we're going to stop there for this time being, but I hope some of the themes of the Elijah cycle are starting to kind of percolate and come through, and we'll see you next week when we talk about Elijah in 1 Kings 19 and Elijah's despondency. See you then.